You've heard the saying all your life. Behind every successful man stands a great woman. It's repeated in speeches, celebrated in movies, taught as wisdom passed down through generations. The idea is simple, almost comforting, that male achievement is impossible without feminine support. But what if this cherished belief hides a darker truth? What if for every man propelled to greatness by a supportive partner, there are many more dragged down into mediocrity by women who quietly sabotage their potential? It's not the story anyone wants to tell. It contradicts the romantic ideal that love always lifts, never limits. It challenges the assumption that relationships are a guaranteed source of strength. But the reality, as harsh as it sounds, is that countless men live in environments that quietly dismantle their ambition, one compromise at a time. And the most dangerous part? They rarely notice it happening until years have passed and their dreams have withered into something smaller, safer, more acceptable to the person sharing their bed. This isn't about villains. It's not about evil women plotting against the men they claim to love. It's about unconscious programming, subtle dynamics, biological impulses, and social conditioning. Patterns that repeat across thousands of households, draining male potential without anyone openly acknowledging it. The sabotage doesn't look dramatic. She doesn't storm into his office and forbid him from chasing his dreams. She doesn't rip up his plans and announce she'll never allow them. Instead, it comes wrapped in ordinary moments that appear harmless in isolation. A dismissive comment about his idea. A sigh when he stays late to finish a project. A preference for predictable routines over ambitious risks. On their own, none of these moments destroy a man, but together, accumulated over years, they create an environment where greatness becomes almost impossible. Think about the doctor who spent years building his expertise, collecting research papers, articles, notes that inspired him. To him, these weren't scraps of paper. They were sparks of creativity, reminders of his deeper purpose, pieces of a vision bigger than the day-to-day grind. One evening, he came home to find them gone. His wife had thrown them out. To her, they were clutter. To him, they were part of his soul. And what did he say? Nothing. He swallowed his protest, convinced himself it wasn't worth the fight. But inside, something fractured. He realized the person closest to him didn't value what gave him life. It wasn't just the loss of paper. It was the quiet message. Your inner world means nothing here. That's how sabotage works. It's not through open battles, but through quiet erosion. The energy required to constantly defend your passion against the indifference or even hostility of the person you love drains you more than any external obstacle ever could. Over time, you stop defending, you stop sharing, you stop reaching as high as you once dreamed, and you convince yourself it's maturity, that you're being responsible, that this is what love requires. But look closely. What's actually happening is the systematic dismantling of your potential. The truth is brutal, but undeniable. Some women don't elevate men to greatness. They normalize them into mediocrity. They turn the home from a sanctuary of restoration into a site of exhaustion. They turn conversation from fuel for ideas into endless cycles of explanation and justification. They turn personal space into a battlefield where every book, every hobby, every spark of individuality must be approved or discarded. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, gradually, under the radar. And because it looks like compromise, because it sounds like reasonableness, because it feels like responsibility, most men don't realize what's happening until the fire inside them has burned low. If you've ever wondered why men of immense talent sometimes end up living quiet, uninspired lives, this is often the reason. Their energy isn't destroyed by competition in the marketplace. It's consumed by the invisible demands of their relationships. The world never sees the cost. Outwardly, it looks like a happy family, a stable household, a man who grew up and stopped chasing wild dreams. Inside, it's a different story. A man who quietly surrendered pieces of himself, who second-guessed the value of his passions, who gave up battles he was too tired to fight. This is why the old saying, behind every successful man stands a great woman, is at best incomplete and at worst a dangerous lie. The full truth is sharper, less comfortable. Behind every successful man stands a great woman, or else he'd be even more successful. Because in countless cases, the woman behind him doesn't propel him forward. She slows him down, sometimes without even realizing it. That's not what society wants you to see. Society loves the story of the supportive wife, the selfless partner, the muse who fuels male greatness. But for every one of those, there are many others whose unconscious behaviors act like weights tied to a man's ankles. The tragedy is that most men don't even blame their partners, they blame themselves. Call it lack of discipline, lack of luck, lack of opportunity. They never consider that the real source of limitation may be the very environment they return to each night. The truth is harsh, but liberating. If you feel your ambition shrinking, if your dreams seem harder to reach with each passing year, it may not be the world that's stopping you. It may be the relationship you're in. And until you see that clearly, you'll never understand why some men of ordinary talent achieve extraordinary success while others, equally gifted, remain trapped in mediocrity. If you look closely at men who once carried great potential, but ended up with modest, unremarkable lives, you'll notice the same pattern repeating. It isn't the absence of talent. It isn't the absence of opportunity. It's the slow grinding down of ambition by the very relationship that was supposed to provide support. The sabotage is rarely obvious. It doesn't arrive in a single blow. It creeps in quietly, through countless small interactions that seem harmless until you recognize the pattern. The first way it happens is through silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence that restores energy, but the hollow kind that follows indifference. Imagine sharing an idea that excites you, something that lights up your mind, only to be met with a flat expression, distracted glance at the phone, or a quick change of subject. After a while, you stop sharing. You stop expecting engagement. The conversation space, which could have been fertile ground for growth, becomes barren. It seems small, just one idea ignored, one dream brushed aside. But repeat it over years, and a man's intellectual energy begins to starve. His mind, once alive with possibility, shrinks to fit the walls of a home that doesn't value expansion. Then there is the endless management of emotions. Not his, but hers. Small frustrations about neighbors, conflicts with friends, complaints about family, dissatisfaction with routines. None of it catastrophic, but all of it demanding attention. He becomes a mediator, a therapist, a problem solver for issues that never end. By the time he sits down to think about his own work, his own projects, his own future, the energy is gone. His clarity has been siphoned off by constant firefighting at home. And because these dramas look like ordinary life, he convinces himself this exhaustion is just what adulthood feels like. But adulthood isn't supposed to drain you of purpose, it's supposed to focus you. Another layer of sabotage comes wrapped in practicality. She doesn't tell him not to dream, not to build, not to grow. She simply insists on caution. Talks about expanding his business. She reminds him of the risks. He imagines writing a book. She brings up the bills. Considers a bold career move. She highlights what might go wrong. Each concern sounds reasonable in isolation. Who could argue against stability? But over time, practicality becomes a cage. His thinking shrinks from possibility to limitation. He begins to censor his own ideas before they leave his lips, knowing they'll be met with a reminder of why they can't work. Eventually, he stops seeing possibility at all. The spark that once drove him to think beyond the ordinary dims under the weight of constant reminders to be realistic. And then there's the erosion of identity. Small rituals, hobbies, and passions that once defined him become labeled as childish, selfish, or unnecessary. His books are clutter. His music is noise. His hobbies are a waste of time. His solitude is neglect. Piece by piece, the man disappears, replaced by a version of himself optimized for utility rather than individuality. He exists not as a whole person, but as a function provider, partner, manager of emotions. The cost is invisible at first, but devastating in the long run. Because the man who loses connection to his inner life loses connection to the fuel that powers real achievement. Finally, there's isolation. Slowly, his social world shrinks. Friends become inconvenient. Colleagues outside of work become rare encounters. His social calendar is filtered through her preferences, her comfort, her interest. Soon, his wife or partner is his only consistent companion. To outsiders, this looks like devotion. Inside, it feels like limitation, because without exposure to other ambitious minds, other perspectives, other challenges, his thinking narrows. He adopts the worldview of the person he spends the most time with, even if that worldview is small. This doesn't happen because she is malicious. Most of the time, she doesn't even realize she's doing it. Her unconscious mind interprets his potential as a threat. If he grows too much, if he achieves too much, maybe he won't need her anymore. Maybe he'll leave. And so, without knowing why, she keeps him tethered. She doesn't forbid growth, she just creates enough resistance to make growth harder than it's worth. The higher his potential, the stronger this resistance becomes. Men capable of greatness often attract women who unconsciously sense the need to contain them. Not because they hate them, but because their own stagnation makes his growth feel unbearable. A man who keeps rising forces her to confront her own refusal to rise, so she doesn't rise. She pulls him down. And because he loves her, because he doesn't want conflict, because he wants to protect the relationship, he accepts the pull. He tells himself compromise is necessary. He convinces himself that ambition can wait. He normalizes limitation until limitation feels like love. But deep down, he knows something has gone wrong. The fire that once burned brightly feels weaker. The edge that once set him apart feels dull. His energy is consumed by maintaining peace at home rather than creating progress in the world. What's most tragic is how invisible this process is to others. Friends see a stable man with a family. Colleagues see someone reliable, dependable, steady. They don't see the empire that could have been built, the book that could have been written, the ideas that could have reshaped an industry. Those dreams died quietly, not with dramatic rejection, but with subtle dismissal. Not with an open fight, but with endless compromises. Not with hostility, but with love that unconsciously feared losing what it could not match. This is the hidden architecture of limitation. It's not destruction in one dramatic moment, but erosion across years. Not fire and fury, but water carving stone until the sharp edges of ambition have been smoothed into safe, rounded shapes. And if you recognize these patterns in your own life, you know how devastating they can be. Not because they make you miserable every day, but because they rob you of the man you were meant to become. When you strip away the surface details, the patterns all point to something deeper. These behaviors dismissing ideas, creating drama, elevating small concerns, eliminating individuality, isolating socially aren't random. They follow a logic. Not the logic of reason, but the logic of biology. From an evolutionary perspective, women evolved in environments where their survival and the survival of their children depended on securing resources and protection from men. If a man grew too powerful, too ambitious, too attractive to others, the risk of abandonment increased. A man who could provide for many women was less likely to remain devoted to just one. A man with extraordinary reach might see less reason to stay in a confined partnership. The unconscious solution: limit him. Not by locking him away, not by open resistance, but by creating enough friction at home to keep his focus there, tethered, manageable. If he's always busy managing emotions, justifying decisions, explaining himself, then he has less energy to conquer the world. If he has less energy to conquer the world, she feels more secure. This is why some of the most capable men attract the strongest limitation. His potential for greatness doesn't inspire her unconscious mind, it terrifies it. The higher he climbs, the greater the risk she imagines of being left behind. And so, without thinking, she develops subtle tactics to hold him close. One of those tactics is intermittent approval. She doesn't constantly criticize, because constant negativity would drive him away. Instead, she alternates. Some days she encourages him, praises his work, makes him feel capable. Other days, she dismisses, criticizes, undermines. The unpredictability creates a psychological hook. He keeps striving for her approval, thinking if he just works a little harder, just explains himself a little better, just compromises a little more, he'll get back to those days when she supported him. This is the psychology of addiction. A reward that arrives sporadically is more powerful than a reward that arrives consistently. The man becomes hooked, not because the relationship is deeply fulfilling, but because the approval comes in doses just rare enough to keep him chasing. Meanwhile, his energy drains away. Another tactic emerges from her own stagnation. If she isn't growing, if she hasn't pursued new interests, developed new skills, or challenged herself intellectually, then his growth feels threatening. His new ideas expose her lack of ideas. His hunger for more highlights her acceptance of less. And instead of rising to match him, she pressures him to sink. Not openly. She doesn't say, "Stop improving." She just labels his passions as selfish, his interests as unnecessary, his ambitions as risky. She reframes growth as irresponsibility. And because he loves her, because he wants harmony, he accepts the frame. The tragedy is that he doesn't see this as sabotage. He sees it as maturity, responsibility, compromise. He tells himself he's doing the right thing. Meanwhile, piece by piece, the man he was meant to be erodes under the weight of someone else's comfort. At the core of all this lies scarcity thinking. Her unconscious programming assumes that his success will reduce her security rather than increase it. Assumes there isn't enough for both to rise. If he wins, she loses. If he expands, she gets left behind. This thinking made sense in prehistoric conditions, where resources were limited and abandonment could be fatal. But in modern life, a man's success usually benefits the household. His financial growth creates stability. His professional network creates opportunity. Ambition builds legacy. Yet biology doesn't update itself to modern conditions. Ancient instincts still fire in contemporary relationships. And those instincts often view male greatness not as a gift, but as a threat. This is why logic rarely works when men try to address these dynamics. He might sit down and explain, "If I succeed, our whole family succeeds." And she might nod. She might even agree. But her behavior often continues unchanged because it isn't governed by logic, it's governed by instinct. This is also why men often misdiagnose the problem. They think the conflict is about communication styles, about different values, about misaligned goals. They learn to listen better, to share more, to compromise. But none of that addresses the root, because the root isn't misunderstanding, it's programming. And until a man recognizes that, he'll keep trying strategies that not only fail, but make things worse. The more he compromises, the more she feels in control. The more he accommodates, the more she tests. The more he sacrifices his individuality, the more she loses respect. Respect is the hidden key. Women don't consciously say, "I want a man I can't control." But unconsciously, that's exactly what keeps attraction alive. When she realizes she can bend him at will, when she sees that her moods dictate his life, attraction dies. She doesn't celebrate his sacrifices, she resents them. So what begins as an unconscious attempt to secure him ends in the destruction of the very desire that kept her invested. She sabotages his potential to keep him close, but in the process, she loses the respect that makes closeness meaningful. This explains why so many relationships decay into cycles of resentment. He resents her for limiting him. She resents him for losing the strength she originally admired. Neither fully understands what happened because neither sees the programming underneath. And yet, in rare cases, something different occurs. A woman who continues to grow herself doesn't feel threatened by his ambition. She sees his rise as an invitation to rise alongside him. She invests in her own development, her own passions, her own strength. She doesn't need to limit him to feel secure because her security comes from within. When that happens, the partnership becomes amplifying rather than limiting. The home becomes a place of restoration, not exhaustion. The relationship becomes a launch pad, not an anchor. And together, they create more than either could alone. But these partnerships are rare, require both people to resist unconscious programming and to embrace growth even when it's uncomfortable. Most men, the decision is simpler but harder. Either accept limitation, disguised as love, or demand a relationship that fuels rather than drains. Because if you don't make that choice consciously, biology will make it for you. The real cost of limitation isn't measured in one argument, one compromise, or one abandoned idea. It's measured in years, decades, the widening gap between the life you might have lived and the life you actually settle for. At first, it doesn't feel like much. You let go of a project, you postpone an ambition, you shrink a dream to fit the walls of your home. But add those up over time, and the distance between potential and reality becomes staggering. You see it in careers. The man who once imagined launching a company now stays in safe employment. The man who dreamed of publishing books lets his manuscripts gather dust. The man who could have transformed an industry settles for being respected in his department. To outsiders, he looks successful enough. Stable job, steady income, comfortable life. But inside, he knows he traded greatness for peace. And that peace is never as satisfying as it promises to be, because it comes at the cost of self-respect. You see it in finances. Ambitious men create generational wealth, not just salaries. They take risks that, when successful, build legacies. But the man who lives under limitation never gets that far. He optimizes for stability, not growth. He chooses security over expansion, calls it responsibility. But in truth, it's submission to someone else's fear. The cost ripples outward. His children inherit less, not just money, but vision. They grow up watching a father who played small. They learn that ambition is dangerous, that greatness is selfish, that safety is the highest virtue. And without realizing it, they carry that mindset into their own lives. You see it in psychology. A man who constantly explains himself, justifies his passions, and manages someone else's emotions eventually loses his own clarity. He doubts himself. He second-guesses every instinct. He hesitates where he once acted decisively. His edge dulls, his confidence shrinks, his presence fades. What once made him magnetic now makes him forgettable. The tragedy is that none of this happens in one dramatic moment. It's not an explosion, it's erosion. 1,000 small cuts, each one too small to notice, until you look down and realize you're bleeding out. And by the time most men recognize what happened, it's too late. They're older, their energy's lower, their opportunities are fewer. They tell themselves it's just aging. But in reality, it's the result of decades spent fighting the wrong battles. Battles inside their own homes instead of outside in the world. The long-term effect isn't just mediocrity, it's bitterness. Because somewhere deep inside, a man always remembers who he was supposed to be. He may bury it. He may silence it. He may distract himself with comfort, but it's there. A quiet voice whispering, "You could have been more." And when that voice grows too loud, it destroys peace anyway. It creates resentment toward the partner who limited him, even if she never meant to. It creates resentment toward himself for allowing it. It poisons the very relationship he sacrificed his dreams to protect. Contrast that with the men who refuse to accept limitation. They aren't necessarily more talented. They don't always start with better opportunities, but they make one brutal, uncompromising decision. They will not trade ambition for harmony. That doesn't mean they live in conflict. It means they set boundaries so clear that no one, even the woman they love, can erode them. They protect their time, their space, their individuality. They refuse to explain or justify their passions. They refuse to shrink their vision to make others comfortable. And because of that, their lives expand. Their wealth multiplies. Their influence grows. Their children inherit not just resources, but the belief that boldness is possible. Look at history. For every story of a man propelled by a supportive partner, there are countless silent tragedies of men held back. But we don't tell those stories. They're too uncomfortable. They expose a truth society doesn't want to face, that many relationships celebrated as stable are actually prisons, comfortable prisons, decorated with family photos and holiday dinners, but prisons nonetheless. The men who break free there by choosing the right partner or by choosing solitude until they find her are the ones who leave legacies. The rest become cautionary tales, their greatness buried under the weight of compromise. The financial difference is stark. The entrepreneur who builds a company doesn't just change his own life, he changes generations. His grandchildren inherit opportunity. His name carries weight. Meanwhile, the man who stayed small may provide a comfortable life for his children, but nothing more. His family story ends with him. The psychological difference is even sharper. The man who protects his individuality retains vitality, even into old age. He keeps learning, exploring, creating. The man who surrendered it grows dull, weary, cynical. His life becomes a countdown rather than a creation, and the emotional difference. It's the cruelest of all. Because the man who accepted limitation doesn't even keep the love he sacrificed for. Respect dies when a man loses himself. Desire dies when a man can be controlled. The very relationship he protected by shrinking eventually collapses under the weight of his diminished presence. This is the long arc of limitation. It looks like peace in the moment. It feels like compromise in the short term. But over years, it leads to regret, resentment, and the quiet death of potential. And that's why the choice is so important. It isn't just about your career. It isn't just about your money. It isn't just about your relationship. It's about your legacy. Do you want your grandchildren to remember you as the man who settled, or as the man who built? Do you want your partner to see you as the man she could bend, or as the man she had to rise to meet? Do you want to look back at your life with quiet regret, or with the satisfaction of knowing you became everything you could be? Because in the end, the greatest tragedy isn't failing, it's never even trying. The choice has always been yours. That's the part most men never realize until it's too late. You can't control biology, can't control unconscious programming, can't erase the instincts that drive people to protect themselves in ways that limit you. But you can control what you allow, what you accept, and what you build around you. The first step is clarity. You need to see the dynamic for what it is. Stop calling it maturity. Stop labeling it compromise. Stop convincing yourself that your shrinking vision is responsibility. Name it honestly. Limitation. As you call it by its name, it loses some of its power, because you no longer confuse sabotage for support. The second step is boundaries. You can love deeply without surrendering yourself. You can give without erasing. You can build a partnership without dismantling your individuality. That only happens if you refuse to justify your passions, your time, your vision. They are not negotiable. They are not optional. They are the core of who you are. The third step is selection. If you haven't yet committed, if you still have a choice, then choose wisely. Don't choose comfort. Don't choose approval. Don't choose someone who makes life easy. Choose someone who makes you rise. Someone who doesn't fear your ambition but matches it with her own. Someone who grows, who challenges, who expands. And if you've already chosen poorly, if you're already trapped in a cycle of limitation, then the hardest step awaits. Confrontation. Not of her, but of yourself. You need to ask the brutal question: what is the price I'm willing to pay for peace? And if the answer is your potential, your legacy, your soul, then you need to decide whether that peace is worth the man you'll become without it. Because here's the final truth. No one respects a man who erases himself. Not his children, not his colleagues. Not even the woman he erases himself for. Respect follows strength, not surrender. Love follows vitality, not exhaustion. Attraction follows independence, not submission. The men who refuse to accept limitation don't live easier lives. They live harder ones. They face more conflict, more resistance, more pressure. But they also create more, build more, inspire more. They leave behind something bigger than themselves. Every man reaches a moment where he feels the tension, a voice inside whispering that the life he's living is smaller than the life he was meant to build. Most ignore it. They drown it out with routine. They silence it with compromise. They wait for the feeling to fade. But the voice never goes away. It grows quieter, perhaps, but never disappears. And one day, often too late, they realize they spent their years protecting comfort instead of pursuing greatness. You don't have to be that man. You can choose differently. You can decide that the home you build will be a place of restoration, not depletion. That the relationship you accept will be one that amplifies you, not erodes you. That the legacy you leave will be measured not in the compromises you made, but in the risks you took, the boundaries you kept, the vision you protected. And if you choose that path, the world changes. Not just for you, but for everyone connected to you. Your children inherit boldness instead of fear. Your colleagues respect presence instead of apology. Your partner, if she rises with which experiences the fulfillment of standing beside a man who refused to shrink. Greatness has never been easy. It has always demanded sacrifice. But the greatest sacrifice of all is giving up your own soul for the illusion of peace. That's not love. It's not maturity. That's slow death. You were not born to be neutralized. We're not meant to spend your life managing someone else's fears. You were built to expand, to build, to leave behind something larger than yourself. And the only thing standing in your way is the choice to either accept limitation or reject it once and for all. So ask yourself, which man will you be remembered as? The one who settled or the one who built? The one who lived quietly within walls someone else constructed? Or the one who broke them down and created his own? The one who compromised until nothing was left? Or the one who demanded more of himself and of those around him? The answer is yours. But remember, every year you delay, the cost grows. Every compromise accumulates. Every dream you postpone becomes harder to resurrect. So choose now. Protect your boundaries. Guard your vision. Build your life as if it matters because it does. And if you want more insights into the hidden psychology of relationships, into the forces that shape ambition, attraction, and legacy, then subscribe. There's more to uncover, more truths to face, and more strength to claim. Because the greatest advantage a man can have is not talent, not luck, not opportunity. It's clarity. Once you see the truth, you can never go back to blindness.